In this video, we will establish an approval workflow system where employee users complete a leave request form that undergoes a series of approvals from administrative users, which will be department supervisors and managers. The administrative users will have the authority to approve or reject these requests. The employee and administrative user accounts will be stored in a resource database within the Form.IO project. When creating these accounts, roles will be assigned to each group to distinguish the different groups. To control the functionalities within the approval workflow process, permissions will be assigned to the leave request forms in conjunction with their respective roles. Additionally, a series of emails will be configured to be triggered during various stages of the workflow, such as when the leave request is submitted, approved, or denied. We will be using the FormView Pro application when demonstrating the final workflow process. Start the workflow by creating a new project from the developer portal. We'll call this approval workflow. The first thing we're going to do in the project is create our resources. Resources are essential for establishing the RESTful database required for the approval workflow process. These resources will hold our employee users filling out the leave request form, as well as the administrative users that will be reviewing the requests. The first resource we will create is the department resource. So I'm going to click Resources here, New Resource, and name it Department. And I'm going to add a text field called Name. We could add other fields to define the department, such as building address or manager, but for simplicity's sake, we're just going to use the name of the department to define the resource. All right, we're going to create the resource. Now we're going to use the resource and make 3 submissions to create our departments. Those are going to be sales, IT, and customer support. The records we are submitting will be used in other resource entities to distinguish our user base within the workflow. Click the Data tab to review your records. This table is our RESTful database that contains the department entries. All right, we're going to create another resource. We're going to call this resource Employee. This resource will establish the data model for the employee users. We're going to add a select component called Department. And we're going to click the Data tab. Here you can choose Resource as your data source type. And we're going to choose Department for our resource option. This will create a link between the employee and the departments, establishing a relationship between the 2 resources. Now scroll down to the item template. Here's where we will define what field within the department resource data object the select field will utilize. This is done by using data dot. We're going to replace the label there, input data dot. And we're going to add the property name of the field we want to use for the select field option. So if I go back to my department resource and look at the name field settings, we're going to click the API tab. I can see the property name of the name field is name in lowercase. So I'm going to copy that, come back over to my item template, and paste it there. So we have item.data.name. And what should happen whenever I save this, if I click my dropdown, I should see the entries we made for the department resource. Next, we're going to add an email and password field. These fields will be used to authenticate employees into our application. Let's go ahead and create the resource. And we're not going to make any submissions quite yet for our employees. We'll get to that later on in the tutorial. We're going to click Resource again. Every project created within Form.IO comes with some default resources and forms. admin resource being one of them. So we're actually going to click this resource to edit it. And this resource will be used to establish the data model for our supervisor and manager users. So similar to the employee resource, we're going to add a select field. And we're going to name that department. Click the data tab. We're going to change the data source type to resource. And we're going to choose department as our resource. And we'll scroll down to the item template, and we're going to be using the same template by replacing label with data.name. And again, this is linking the admin resource to the department resource field entries. So we'll save that. And we're going to add another select field called role. This field will be used to determine what kind of administrator the user will be. So we'll click the data tab, and then we're going to add the following label to the options here: supervisor and manager. The label for the option is what the end user will see when the drop down is clicked. The value is auto-populated based on the label input and is the backend identifier for the option. So these values will be used further in the workflow for conditional logic and so on. So let's save this and create the resource. And we'll come back to this later when we're ready to establish our admin group. Next, we are going to create and delegate our roles. Roles authorize users, allowing them to perform specific tasks and gain access to forms and their underlying submission data. These roles are managed within the Access tab of your project and utilized by the role assignment action when creating our user base. They operate in tandem with the Form.IO permission system, which helps regulate access and permissions for forms and resources. So let's create our roles by clicking the Access tab on the left-hand navigation bar. We're going to click the New Role button. And we're going to be creating 3 roles: employee, supervisor, and manager. All right, we can see our new roles here. With our roles in place, we need to assign these roles to the permissions for our resources that we just created. So we're going to click Resources and go to our Department resource. And we're going to click the Access tab. And we're going to add the following roles to the Read All Submission permission within the Access for the Department resource. We're going to add Employee, Supervisor, and Manager. We're going to save the settings. So this permission allows anyone with the given role to read all submission data for the resource. So we're going to go to our employee resource and do the same thing. Go to the Read All Submission permission, add employee, supervisor, and manager. Make sure and save the settings. And we're going to do the same for our admin resource. Okay, the next step is assigning the roles to our user groups. This is done by adding the role assignment action to the various resources we established in the previous steps. All right, so let's navigate to the employee resource. Click the Action tab. We're going to click the Action drop-down and select Role Assignment and click the Add an Action button. We're going to click the Resource Association, select Existing Resource, action type will be Add Role, and for the role, we're going to select Employee. Let's save the action. So when the form is submitted, this action will execute, and this will add the employee role to the record when a new employee is created. We're going to do the same thing for the admin resource. Click Resources, Admin, Actions, and we're just going to go ahead and delete this role assignment action. This came with the resource by default when the project was created. So let's get rid of that one. Now we'll add a new role assignment action. We'll call this Role Assignment Supervisor. For resource association, we're going to click Existing Resource. Action type is Add Role, and role is going to be Supervisor. Next, we need to add a condition to the action so that way this action only executes when the supervisor role is selected from the admin resource. So we're going to do that by scrolling down to the action conditions. And we're going to click this Select the Conditional field and click Role. Select Comparison will be Equals, and Enter Value will be Supervisor. Now this value here comes from the role dropdown from the admin resource. So if I scroll over to my admin resource form and I edit the role field, click Data, you can see that I'm using the supervisor value here to fire off the condition. Okay, so we're going to save that. And we're going to add a second role assignment action. This one's going to be called Role Assignment Manager, and we're going to do the same exact thing, except this time the role will be Manager. We're going to set up our conditions, and the value here is going to be Manager instead of Supervisor. So we'll go ahead and save that. Alright, with our conditional actions in place, we can now use one single admin resource to assign two different administrative roles when we submit this form. With our resource models created, our roles and permissions saved to our resources, and role assignment actions in place ready to distribute the roles, we are now ready to establish our different user groups. So we're going to establish our employee database first. So let's click Employee and then Use. And we're going to make submissions creating our employees. The department dropdown will determine what each account will be associated with, and we're going to be creating enough submissions to cover all of the departments. So I'm just going to make up an email here. Password's going to be password123 and hit submit. Alright, we have all of our employee accounts created, so let's move on to our admin resource. Click Resources and then Admin and click the Use tab. Same thing, we're going to make several submissions to establish our administrative database. We're going to create enough supervisors to cover all the departments, and then one manager that's going to oversee all the departments. One thing that we forgot to do when we were modifying our admin resource is to allow this department field to be able to select multiple values. We need that for the manager, so we're going to go ahead and click Edit here. And we're going to open up the department settings, click Data, and then we're going to check this multiple value setting. I'm going to save this, save the resource. Now let's go back and use the resource, and let's go ahead and create our manager account. So now I'm able to select multiple departments, so I'm going to select all three departments. I'm going to select manager for the role. Manager at example.com, and again, password's just going to be password123. So when I submit this, our role assignment action is going to execute, and I'm going to receive the manager role because the manager role was selected in this dropdown. So I'm going to go ahead and use the admin resource again, and we're going to create our supervisors. I'm going to create sales. Role will be supervisor. And I'm just going to do supervisor plus sales at example.com, password123. Alright, click the Data tab and you can review the admin records. So we have our 3 supervisors for each department and a manager that oversees all 3 departments. Next, let's create the leave request form, which is what the employee users will fill out when requesting their leave. The same form will be used by the administrative users to either approve or deny the request and move the form status along within the approval workflow process. So we'll click Forms in the navigation bar here, click New Form, select Web Form, and we're going to call this form Leave Request. And let's create the form. Add a panel to the form. We're going to call it Leave Request. This is the section of the form the employee will see and fill out for their leave request. We're going to add a select component called Status. This field is going to be a special field that's hidden on the form and will determine the state of the submission within the approval workflow process. Later on in this video, we're going to write JavaScript code inside a form controller that will utilize the values of this field to create a state machine for the form. And that's going to be the catalyst for the entire approval workflow process. We're going to scroll down and check the hidden setting. Click Data to add our values. First value is requested. So this status just means the employee has submitted the leave request. Next value is emergency. The employee submitted the leave request with the emergency leave type. Next one is supervisor approved. This just means the supervisor, the department supervisor, has reviewed the request and approved it. Manager approved. The manager has reviewed the request that's already been approved by the department supervisor, and they have also given their approval. And then last status is denied, and this just means either the supervisor or manager has denied the leave request. Alright, with our values in place, we're going to click this default value dropdown and select requested. Since this field is going to be hidden, the initial value needs to be requested. That's going to be the initial kickoff for the state of the form. And we're also going to scroll down here and uncheck this clear value when hidden. Since the component's going to be hidden, we don't want our default values being cleared out. And we're going to save the component settings. Alright, let's go ahead and save our form. Don't forget to periodically save the form as you're building it out. And we're going to add a second select field called leave type. Click the Data tab here. And we're just going to add some different types of leaves the employees can select. Make sure and add emergency and other. These are going to be special values that are going to kick off some conditional workflows within the form. Alright, we're going to hit save. Next, we're going to click layout and we're going to add a column. And this is going to hold our start and leave dates for our leave request. So we're going to add a date time component to the first column called start date. And we're going to be removing the time portion of the format here. And then we're going to click time and uncheck this enable time input. And we're going to save, and we're going to do the same exact thing for another date time called end date. Remove the time portion from the format. Uncheck time input. Alright, let's save our form, and then we're going to add some conditional fields. So we're going to click basic here and add a text area. And we're going to add this underneath the leave type dropdown. And this is going to be called explain the type of leave you are requesting. Okay, I want this field to, so the users are able to type in their type of leave. So we're going to actually make this into a WYSIWYG editor. So we're going to scroll down, click editor, and select CK editor. And then we're going to add some conditions to this field. So we're going to hit conditional here. And we're just going to add a simple conditional. So we're going to select show this field when all conditions are met. And then we're going to add our condition here. So the when dropdown is going to be for leave type is equal to, and we're going to be selecting the other value here. So when other is selected from the leave type, this text area or this WYSIWYG will display for the end user, and they can type in the type of leave they're requesting. All right, we're going to do the same thing for another type of WYSIWYG editor. This one's going to be for the emergency value. So we're going to say, please explain the emergency. I'm going to make this into a CK editor as well. And then we're going to have the same conditions, except this time the leave type value will be emergency instead of other. And we'll save that, save the settings, and save our form. All right, next we're going to add a couple of hidden components that will hold admin resource data associated with the logged in user. This data will be fetched from the admin resource by a data source component and will output the data to the hidden components we're going to be adding here in a sec. So at the top of the form, we're going to add our first hidden component. We're going to call this Supervisor. You're going to want to make sure the property name within the API tab is Supervisor in lowercase. And we're going to add a second hidden component called Manager. And property name here should be Manager in lowercase. Next, we're going to add a data source component. And we're going to call this Admin. We want to make sure property name is admin in lowercase. And we're going to go ahead and click the Trigger tab. And for the trigger on event, we're going to add an event called fetch admins. This will be in camel case. And we'll click the fetch tab. And we're going to add the following admin resource endpoint URL to the data source URL. Now keep in mind this endpoint here is going to be different. This is going to be your own project endpoint. All right, this URL will reference the admin resource submission data and will match the department from the resource with the associated logged in employee. Next, go down to the Transform Data tab and open that up. We're going to paste the following JavaScript. And what this JavaScript is doing, it's going to populate those hidden components that we added with the appropriate admin data that's associated with the logged in employee. Finally, we're going to check the Form.IO authentication setting and save our component. All right, let's save our form. Next, we're going to add some calculated fields to the form that's going to utilize the configurations made by the data source field we just added. And we're going to present the logged in employee with the summary information containing their user email and associated department details. So let's go and add a select component. We're going to call this employee. We're going to scroll down and click the disabled setting. We don't want the employee to be able to select their employee. It should just auto-populate, so that's going to be disabled. We're going to click the Data tab. Click Data Source Type and select Resource. And then for the resource, we're going to select Employee. Scroll down to the item template. And this is going to be item.data.email. And this will output the email data for the logged in employee. And we're going to scroll down to the calculated values at the bottom here. We're going to paste the JavaScript in the code block. And this code is going to use the Form.IO getUser variable to populate the employee's email within the field. It will also ensure this information is cleared out after a timeout occurs on the form. Let's save those settings. Next, we're going to click Layout and add a content component. But all this is doing is interpolating the metadata of the employee user and outputting the department, supervisor, and manager associated with that employee. Click the Refresh on Change setting, save the component settings, and save the form. All right, we're all finished up with the Leave Request section. Now we're going to move on to our administrative panels. We're going to open the layout section and add a panel component. This will be called Supervisor Approval. Click the Conditional tab. You're going to paste that in the code block for the JavaScript under the Advanced Conditions. This JavaScript is using the getUser variable. Determine who is logged in. If the user is a supervisor or a manager, this panel will display within the form. Let's save this. And within the supervisor approval panel, we're going to add a select component. And we're going to call this supervisor approval. Click the data tab, and we're going to add the label approved, as well as denied. You also want to make sure that the API property name reads Supervisor Approval 1 in camel case. This is going to be used for some other conditional logic further in the video here. Save that. Next, we're going to add a text area, and this is going to be called Denial Reason. Scroll down to the Editor dropdown and select CK Editor. And we're going to add a simple conditional here. Show or hide field should be show. When all conditions are met, add a condition. And this condition should fire off when the supervisor approval field is equal to denied. So we're going to save this condition in the component settings. And then lastly, under the premium grouping, we're just going to drag and drop a signature component. That way the supervisor can sign off on the request, whether they approved or denied. So we're going to save that. And that's it for the supervisor approval. We're going to move on to our manager approval panel, which is going to look almost the same. So again, we're going to add a panel component. This is going to be called manager approval. We're going to click conditional here and open the advanced conditions. And we're going to paste the JavaScript code in the code block here. Similar to the supervisor approval panel, this condition is going to verify if the logged in user is a manager. And if so, this panel will display. Let's save the component settings. We're going to add a select component. This is going to be called manager approval. And we'll add the labels approved and denied. Click the API tab and ensure the property name reads manager approval 1 in camel case. Save the settings. We're going to add a text area. Again, this will be called denial reason. We're going to switch this to a CK editor. Click the Conditional tab to add a simple conditional. This field will show when all conditions are met. We're going to add a condition when manager approval is equal to denied. Save the condition in the settings. And again, we'll add a signature block for our managers to sign off. There we go. Let's save the form real quick. Next, configure the roles and permissions on the form to determine what each user group's role can do on the leave request form and its underlying submission data. So click the Access tab for the leave request form, and we're going to start adding roles to these permissions. For Create Own, we're going to add Employee. For Create All, we're going to add Supervisor and Manager. For Read Own, we're going to add Employee. This just means that the employee can read their own submission. Read All will be Supervisor and Manager. This means Supervisor and Managers can read all of the submissions against the leave request form. Update Own, we're going to leave blank. Update All, we're going to add Supervisor and Manager. This means that managers and supervisors can edit and update all the submissions against the leave request form. Delete Own, we're going to leave blank, and Delete All, we're just going to add managers. So only managers can delete the submissions for the leave request. Lastly, we're going to scroll down to the Form Definition Access section, and we're going to remove the anonymous role here. And this will ensure the user is prompted to log into the application before they can read the form or see the form. So we're going to save the settings. With our roles and permissions in place, we're now going to add a form controller, which is a powerful tool within Form.IO that provides an additional layer of control over the rendered form by using JavaScript. In this example, we're going to use the form controller to manage the state of the form. The state will be mapped to the status field values within the form and will control the entire approval workflow process. To add a form controller, we're going to click the three dots here and click Form Settings. We're going to paste it in the form controller code block. Some important things to take note here. All of our submission data.status values here, we need to make sure these match up with the values of our status field on our form, which we can see here. The other thing is we need to make sure that the Supervisor Approval 1 and Manager Approval 1 match up with our approval drop-downs for the supervisor approval and manager approval on our leave request form. So as long as those match up, the form controller should function properly. And what this is doing, to summarize, the code is adding a before submit handler that identifies the state of the form. The workflow starts with the employee submitting the form with the requested value from the status field. When the supervisor approves the request, the form enters into the supervisor approved state by applying the value to the status field. From there, the manager will review the request, and if approved, will enter into the manager approved state. If either the supervisor or manager denies the request, the form will enter the denied state. And lastly, if the leave request is submitted with the emergency leave type, the form will carry the emergency state. All right, let's save our settings. Next, we are going to set up a series of email actions that will take into account the current state of the form set by our form controller and execute actions based on that state. There will be separate email actions attached to the leave request form to execute each possible leave request scenario. It's important to note that I am utilizing an SMTP transport called MailTrap, where all emails sent using the transport will be received within one inbox. It's recommended that you set up your own email transport so the email workflow functions properly. With that in mind, let's set up our first email action. Let's click the Action tab for the leave request form. Click the Action dropdown and select Email. We're going to click Add an Action, and we're going to call this Supervisor. We're going to select your transport type. For the to email address, we're going to add double curly brackets data.supervisor.data.email. So this code will interpolate the email for the department supervisor and send the email accordingly. Scroll down to the message section. Here's where we are gonna put our SSO token URL. Right here, this is our application endpoint, so we're going to be using the FormView Pro application to test out our workflow. The SSO token is referencing the admin resource and outputting the email data so that the correct administrator is logged in whenever this link is clicked. This is my own project endpoint. This is the endpoint of the leave request form. This is the submission endpoint. And we want to view this submission in edit mode so that way we can approve or deny the request. So keep in mind you will have to use your own project endpoint for this. I've also added HTML as well as the integrated Bootstrap library to contain this SSO token URL link within a button. So let's scroll down and add our conditional. So we want this email action to fire off when the status of the form is requested. So we're going to click our conditional field here and click status. The comparison should be equals, and the value will be requested. And remember, these values are coming from the status field found within the form that's set by our form controller. So let's save this action. Next email will be the manager email. So we're going to add another email action here and call it manager. Select our SMTP transport. The to email address is going to be data.manager.data.email within the open and close double curly brackets. And we're going to scroll down to our message. And this is going to use the same type of SSO token. It's still going to be looking in the admin resource and referencing the email field. One thing we're going to change is the action execution. So we want the method, this action method, to be triggered on an update as well. So what's going to happen is the employee is going to submit the leave request. The initial email is going to go out to the supervisor. The supervisor is going to review that and update it with their approval. And with that update, we want the email action to execute. So we'll add the update value here. Similar to the supervisor conditional, we're going to add a conditional here to trigger the status field. Except this time the value is going to be supervisor approved. And again, these are all the values coming from the status dropdown within our leave request form. I'm going to save the action. Next email will be our emergency status email. So we're going to add another action called emergency. Select our transport. The to email address is going to be data.manager.data.email. And same SSO token here. For this, since the emergency request is going to be on the initial submission, we do not need a update method here. We're going to set up our conditional to trigger the status field again, except this time it's going to be when the status of the form is emergency. All right, let's set up our approval email. This email will fire off when our manager approves the leave request. We're going to call this approved. Select our email transport. Our to email address is going to be referencing the employee email data. So we're going to add data.employee.data.email. Scroll down to the message section. Our SSO token is going to be a little different here. Again, we're referencing the employee resource, so that needs to be changed from admin. Make sure that our method is set with the update value. For our conditional, we're still going to be triggering our conditional based on the status when it equals the value manager approved. And that'll be in camel case there. Save the action. Our last email here will fire off whenever the leave request has either been denied by the supervisor or the manager. So we're going to add our action and call it denied. Select our transport. The to email address will be to our employee again. Our SSO token again will reference the employee resource. Make sure and add the update method, so it fires off when the submission has been updated with the denied status. I'm going to select status again for our conditional field, and it equals denied. So in total, you should have 5 email actions saved to the leave request form, each of them firing off when a leave request has been submitted, when it's been approved by the supervisor, when it's been approved by the manager, when it's been denied by either the supervisor or manager, and whenever the leave request has the emergency status. And again, all of these triggers are based on the status field here. If you need to review the values again, you can find that in the status field on the form. These are all the values that are being used to fire off those conditional emails. Okay, the last thing that we need to do before we can test out this workflow is to reconfigure our login form. So we're going to go to Forms and find our user login. And we're going to click the Action tab and edit this login action. We're going to click Resources and add Admin and Employee. Save the action. This will ensure the login action will reference the correct resource records when authenticating the user into the form. With everything in place, let's test out the workflow using the FormView Pro application. Navigate to the Leave Request form. Click the Launch tab. And click this Go to Form button. I'm going to open this in a new window. And the workflow will start off with the employee. So we're going to enter in credentials of our customer support employee. Keep in mind these credentials that we're going to enter come from the employee resource, the credentials we submitted against this resource here. We're going to log in as joe@example.com. Password 123. And we should see the output of our email address, as well as our department supervisor, and manager. I'm going to select personal as my leave type, enter in the start and end date, and click submit. The form will now be in the requested state, and we'll fire off the initial workflow by sending an email to the department supervisor for the employee. So let's look in our inbox. We have an email waiting for us for the department supervisor. Scroll down to our SSO token and click that. So we can now see the supervisor approval panel since we're logged in as a supervisor. We're going to go ahead and approve this, sign it, and submit. The form will now be in the supervisor approved state. We'll fire off another email to the manager to further progress the approval workflow. So I'm going to log out of here. Looking in our inbox again, I can see we have an email to our manager. Click the SSO link. And we should now see the manager approval panel since we're logged in as the manager. Go ahead and approve this, sign. The form will now be in the approved state. We'll fire off another email to the employee to notify them of the approved request. Let's look in the inbox again. We can see our notification to our employee joe@example.com, notifying them of the approved request. So let's log in as another employee. We'll use our sales employee. So we're going to launch the form again in FormView Pro. Our sales employee is Kelly@example.com. Password 123. Again, we'll have an output of our email, department, supervisor, and manager information. This time our leave type is going to be emergency. We're going to have our WYSIWYG editor prompting us to explain the emergency. Kelly forgot about her vacation, which is in a week. So we're going to submit that. The form will now be in the emergency state. It's going to fire off an email that bypasses the department supervisor and goes directly to the manager for approval. So let's look in our inbox. We see that was sent to the manager. Click the SSO link. And as the manager, I'm going to deny the request. You have no vacation days. We'll sign this off and hit submit. So the form will now be in the denied state, and we'll fire off an email to the employee to notify them of the denied request. So here we have our deny notification. Keep in mind the message here can be modified, the title can be modified for the email, dictating it's been denied or approved, so that can all be modified within the email action. So that's the workflow. We've touched on a lot of fundamental building blocks of Form.IO. We created resources to establish our user database as well as our administrators. We integrated roles and permissions to dictate the form functionality. We used a form controller to dictate the form state. We implemented conditional logic to show and hide certain sections of our form. And we added an email workflow system with SSO authentication. Be sure to check out the written documentation for this tutorial in the link below for more in-depth information. Thanks for watching.